strong trigger warning that there will be instances of animal cruelty, as well as an SA that has been discovered. It is not an SA committed by Mark and Leslie, but it is something that they could have prevented. I'll try to give a warning before I discuss these. Listener discretion is advised.
There's such fulfillment and purpose in our hearts in the mission of what the ramp stands for. Just the spiritual growth.
Welcome back, everybody. Here is episode 9. Since naming Mark and Leslie, I've basically been flying on my roller skates behind a speeding car. I've been trying to keep up, piecing puzzles together. Mark and Leslie clearly did the same thing for many, many years, but it's hard to changing it better whenever you don't want to. Currently, Mark and Leslie are in Hamilton, Alabama, for those of you who don't know. They're working at a place called The Ramp, ran by Karen Wheaton, who they've always idolized. Leslie is teaching, possibly acting or singing or preaching, and Mark is in real estate, doing home inspections as well as repairs. Real estate is the thing that Karen Wheaton and her family does, and they own a lot of properties, like 45. So it's no surprise that they're also wrapped up in that. One thing's for sure, the dollars left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. There were a lot of things that seemed creepy and suspicious. Of all the people connected to Mark and Leslie Dollar, there has been only one pair of ex-board members who has come forward and just let us know that they're sorry about what happened. I'm really not surprised. Also, I will be doing more interviews of others. There have been a lot more people coming forward. Let me get into a little bit of a timeline and some clarifications. Mark and Leslie were married in 1994 and they became youth pastors. They did this for a while and then they said that they came to Arkansas around 2000, although most of the reports I find actually put them here around 2003. Regardless, a lot of details with them are always sketchy because they lie depending on what narrative they want to use. In 2003 and 2004, we have the instance of Shayna and other kids being invited over to their house, not crashing on the floor, invited. And being lured in because the Dollars had much better property as well as four-wheelers, good meals. It was very luring. I want to clarify something really quick at this moment in the timeline. Mark and Leslie make it sound like they just had kids spontaneously sleeping on their floor and they didn't have a plan because of that. And that was the reason that everything started off unofficial. Let's listen to a little bit of a recording about this.
In 2007.
The beginning of it was super messy. Most people, a nonprofit, they start with a board, they start with planning, they do all the administrative. We didn't start that way. Literally, kids started sleeping on our floor. I can remember. No, they didn't.
So they make it sound very spontaneous, right? They make it sound like, oh, these kids were coming over and they wanted to stay. They didn't want to go home. And it's just kind of funny because in a little bit of an earlier clip on this very same podcast, Mark makes it sound like when they bought their property, which would have been way before 2007, that Leslie knew that this would be the property where they would start it, which would mean that it's not spontaneous.
So tell us about the home you have.
Well, it's a home that I couldn't see the big picture of what she saw when we first saw the home. And she could see the dream. She could see it all involved. There's one night I can remember, when he comes in the room, he's speaking. And he said, "Do you trust me?" And I said, "Yes." We went and we battled for that property. It was a battle, right?
It was a battle. They battled for that property. She saw something. I just find that a little suspicious in this story because of the fact that they say it's spontaneous, and that's one of the reasons they didn't have the board and the plans in place, and that's why it was super messy. If you knew that this was a dream you wanted, if you knew this was something that you might do, and that this land was the place that you might do it, then why wouldn't you start by trying to do it the proper way? Obviously, my opinion is that they saw dollar signs. It's just so ironic that their name is Dollar. Like, there's no way for that not to be ironic. So, that puts us around 2007. Now, this was also around the corn incident, another thing I want to clarify, which is that there was corn on his computer. Back in these days, you had to download it. Now, this was not homemade, obviously. This was, sought out. But yes, it was father-daughter genre, specifically. This was a work computer that it was found on, and there might be more than one incident. This is something we're trying to clarify. So, around 2008, they actually become a 501c3. Now, it's important to note that in 2013, they stopped being a 501c3 for 3 years, and then they renewed it again in 2015. I'm a little curious, and I think it's a little suspicious. A little more clarification that I want to make is they say that they want to have a safe environment for abused, abandoned, and broken teens. What we found is that often they would tell people that these were troubled teens so that the teens wouldn't be believed if any abuse was reported. I was even told that they would treat kids worse in the summer because the kids weren't around counselors and teachers, which is typical abuse behavior. At some point after I left, they actually started taking in older kids and calling them leaders, which was a way for them to slack off and not have to do as much work because these older people were taking care of the younger people. They started using NDAs and they used contracts with some kids and not others. And along with these leaders and kids, there was a lot of unvetted adults who should not have been around kids and who a lot of people considered extremely creepy. I also heard from one woman who was a teenager at the time, and I remember her being around. She was only 15. She was pregnant and she was being abused by her boyfriend, and they refused to let her live there. Now, if your whole purpose is to help teens like what you had been through, Leslie Dollar, then why wouldn't you take that kid in? Oh, maybe because you can't make them dance around and minister and do physical labor for you. Maybe because it would actually be a sacrifice. Around 2012 or 2013, they actually took in DHS kids for a very short time. This is the instances where I've talked about in my past videos where multiple people have reported that they were told to lie to DHS about how many kids were living there and about people who were 18 living in the same rooms as people who were under 18. So they were telling them to say that there were not about 10 to 15 other people living there. I've had multiple people confirm this story. Also during this time, whenever they're taking DHS kids, Mark would often say that he was an honorary probation officer. Another lie. He used this as a way to threaten kids and say that he was going to take them to jail. And yet there's no proof that Mark was ever a probation officer. We have multiple accounts of him saying that he was. One person who's been helping me with some of this research is named Kevin. Kevin, thank you so much for letting me know about the things that you went through there, including being taken advantage of because his parents were good donors. In 2017 or 2018, the Dollar's oldest daughter was finally old enough to go to Ramp School of Ministry or Ramp University. I do this in quotations just because they're not a real school and they don't give out any sort of actual transcript. And they say they're associated with Oral Roberts University, but there's nothing truly official about any of their quote-unquote education. Now, in one of my videos, somebody mentioned that their oldest daughter had cut them off. I want to clarify that we do not know why their oldest daughter had cut them off. We do not know how long she cut them off for. This is just something that we've heard. However, this is someone that I never would have expected because she was basically the golden child. I believe they used their oldest daughter the most to get into the ramp. I was actually told by somebody that Leslie used to take her oldest daughter's money. I really cannot imagine growing up under people like Mark and Leslie. In 2020, we started our survivors group. Whenever Mark and Leslie found out about it, they had a huge freak out saying that we had left God and what God had for us and that we were bitter and offended, whatever they needed to say just to make themselves feel better. Of course, they were pretty knee-deep in the ramp by this point, and they'd always wanted to go to Hamilton anyway, and so I'm sure that to them this was like, we're called to go to Hamilton, and that's our next step. I think this is a big reason why they didn't take Adullam with them. Something really important that I want to point out is that they are taking kids from RSM, that school of ministry I mentioned. They're also taking teenagers. They are still taking in kids, and I don't think they have any plans to stop. In fact, the reason I think that is because on the podcast, they mentioned that they actually think the ramp had a similar calling.
The similar words have been told the ramp, and that they'll have a home for children here. Yes. Or for teenagers here. And with this being a place where conferences are held with teenagers, what a better place to have a home here with their teenagers that come through this ministry, that need a place.
What better place than this to be a predator? One other thing I forgot to mention was that they did say that they had their home bought for them in cash in 2018 when they were bragging on this podcast. So whenever they moved, I mean, they probably made a good $350,000 or more. I just want to point out this one recording where Leslie talks about how they're barely making it. Now, again, in my timeline that I show you, I estimate that they probably made $1.2 to $2 million. I know that several board members left because they wouldn't open up their finances and let them look through it. In fact, whenever they were complaining about their finances, one of the board members offered to help them look it over because they had accountant experience and they refused. They did not want any other board members in their finances. Listen to how she talks about it. She tries to almost say like, oh, we're barely making it, but then she stops herself.
Just said, God, whatever that is, we just trust you. We're just we're making it in what we're doing now. There's no way we could facilitate more than one home right now unless we found other people that would want to do what we do.
This was around the time they were making like $250,000. They got a $70,000 grant from the state of Arkansas at one point. RSM kids who have lived with them reported that there have been really weird rebuking sessions, like getting them up in the middle of the night. They reported that they had as many kids as they could crammed into basements that would often flood, leaving them with stinky, moldy rooms to live in. All of this whenever Karen's taken in hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions, for renovations and dorm rooms. What about all those offices that they're using? Why don't they give those to the girls living in moldy basements? I've also been told that there is usually still a female very close to Mark, but there's always been a female close to Mark. So that puts them in Hamilton and where they're at now in 2025. Let's get into a few things that I've been noticing. Something I'm currently investigating is the incident where Mark worked at a junior high school in Russellville and was let go after 9 weeks. Something about this is extremely suspicious. Before we get into this school incident, I want to play this one clip that just really bothers me. They're all about this daddy stuff, and I think they started getting heavy on the daddy stuff, especially at this time when he had the school incident. Just listen to the way that he says this.
I'm that father figure. One thing that I recognized, even in the schools and youth ministry abroad, a lot of daddies are missing. And fathers have a tremendous impact, especially with this area of a young man or a young woman.
I don't know, it's just creepy the way that they really press to the whole daddy issue. They talked about that so much in their podcast. The recording I'm about to show you, Mark says that he works in the school. He almost says it in the present tense like he's still doing it, but at this time I think he had already been let go. But listen to the way he talks. I want you to listen to the way that he says he did stuff that he wasn't supposed to do. That's a huge red flag. There's a reason that rules are in place. He also says he had his own classroom, but teachers' aides don't get their own classroom. And why would they let some unlicensed person take in kids who have mental disorders? Listen to this incident and what they say about it.
They brought me on, and it's kind of a new concept for our community. It's called a focus room, and it's a room where they send kids that have either mental health issues or they may have some like an ADHD or ADD disorder. But I have what we call focus kids, and there's probably around 25 to 30 of them in our school. We have about 1,000 students in our school, and I'm the only room.
It's 8th and 9th grade.
8th and 9th grade.
Oh, wow.
And really, these kids can come to my room at any point, and most of the time when they come, they're pretty worked up or they have anxiety issues, and so it's my job to get them in their kind of right frame of mind and get them back into general population, but then I also take in all the in-school suspended students.
Okay.
And that's a whole different task, but I love it. They had to trim us back, being, I guess, we were into our 9th week of school, and they had so many kids starting to want to come to my room. They had to trim it back. And
Were you serving French press
I know,
in
right?
the classroom?
Well, I was doing things that probably I wasn't supposed to. I was letting them eat in class. I was bringing candy for them, and principals found out and pulled me back a little bit.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, you were being, what I love about him is he was being a daddy.
Yes.
Because most of the students that we find don't have daddies. I mean, it's just, there really has been, and we've seen that in youth ministry. There is an attack on the family.
Yes.
That whole conversation is weird to me. I don't know what you guys think. Supposedly he was texting a 14-year-old girl and it was brought to the board. I'm sure that he was doing all of these things at the school just like he was a probation officer. Now again, Mark's Facebook was deleted within 24 hours of me posting about them, naming them. Another creepy thing that came up on one of the videos that I shared was that Mark started getting everybody purity rings. And not just that, but he engraved Love Daddy on the inside. Oh, y'all. You really can't make this stuff up. You can't get more cult-like than this. A little bit more info and some patterns that I've seen. Family separation was a huge one. Often they would be told whenever they come in that they weren't allowed to talk to their families for a month. This was supposed to be to separate them and get them used to everything. I mean, I just don't understand why kids who have done very minor things being treated like prisoners. They had contracts that covered rules about when the parents could come and see their child. If the parent showed up without a planned visit, they weren't allowed to see them or take them out. They had rules about when they could leave on holidays. In fact, one girl had gone to the hospital for being in a horrible car incident, and they were mad at the mother for wanting to be at the hospital. The mother. People who claim that they're trying to repair families. Now, not only that, but they would tell the kids that their parents didn't want to talk to them because they were upset with them for doing something bad. But then they would tell the parents that the kids had gotten in trouble and so they couldn't talk to them. Literally lying to each party to keep them from talking to them. In some cases, people were even monitored by people who were spying or reporting back on them and not allowed to talk to their parents alone. Whenever I was there, we only had one other quote-unquote dorm, which was the guest house where the guys stayed and the girls stayed in the main house. After I left, they had the kids pickaxe the land and completely build a tiny home, which they then sold for $30,000, that was then named like the other dorm. You know, the girls and the guys' dorms, they switched it up all the time. They almost always had people that they particularly targeted, usually people who didn't have as much defense or were younger. And in those cases, they would call them horrible names and tell them they had spirits, like Jezebel told other people not to talk to them and that they couldn't talk to other people. They almost always wanted to adopt a female, tell them that they were special, they would get different treatment, they would get better clothing and better food and access to better, even better shower materials. They would move her over to their house. And often these were the girls who were close to Mark, and often these were the girls who would also massage his feet. In some cases, they were also rewarded for spying or for helping them find out information, and in some cases they were even demoted back to the girls' dorms, maybe because they didn't fit the mold well enough. Now, trigger warning for the next thing, I'm going to be discussing the animal cruelty that I found out about, which is also a pattern. Rarely did they ever have their animals fixed or given proper medical care when they needed it. Whenever I lived there was a rabbit that was living in the tiny cage and hardly ever messed with, and I slowly began to socialize the rabbit, but she was dying of heat stroke essentially, and I begged them to let me bring her in. I paid for all of the things and started taking care of the rabbit, and then when I left, I took it with me. That rabbit would have just died there. I know that they never monitored their dogs at all. Apparently there was a golden retriever that they had, which is an expensive breed, that was mauled by neighbor dogs. And instead of getting it attention that it needed and taking it to the vet, they just let it suffer for like a month until it died. The kids had to dig it out from under the house and bury it. The next one is the one that really bothers me. So I said that they had a lot of unvetted leaders coming in, and they've had a lot of people who are super militant to the guys, treated them like shit, and were even disturbed people. Apparently once they had a cat that had something really wrong with it, that was really, really sick. They refused to take it to the vet and get it euthanized. Instead, they decided that somebody was going to shoot it. People do this a lot in Arkansas. I don't agree with it. I understand if you're really poor or something, but Mark and Leslie had a lot of money. Okay, we knew they had a lot of money. That's what's wrong here. They wouldn't get kids care, they wouldn't get animals care, so they told this person to shoot it. This sadistic, twisted guy did not shoot it. He hung it. And then when it was struggling, finally shot it after it had been hanging for a little bit and struggling. Yeah, and meanwhile, they have a Maine Coon cat. Here it is. Its name is Maximus, and she has an Instagram for it. Those cats are also not cheap. Maine Coons can cost, if they're well bred, about $1,000 to $4,000. So they have nice animals, golden retrievers and Maine Coons, but they won't take care of their animals they have. Another report from Hamilton is that they had a dog that they basically left in a crate from 8 a.m. to 11 p.m. in its own feces. Once it was older and not a puppy, they just changed it in the backyard until it got sick enough that Daddy took care of it, they said. That's the end of the animal cruelty. So the next thing is that they were extremely controlling, not just to teenagers, but also to people who were adults, who were 18, 19, and 20 and older. They claimed that they wanted people to talk to them and communicate and tell them whenever they wanted spouses and that they should be intricately involved and it would be a positive experience, but this is not the case. Multiple people have had to move out because they tried to use their relationship as a way to control them. On their side whenever they were doing what Mark and Leslie wanted, and then they would be against them and say they needed to break up whenever they weren't doing what Mark and Leslie wanted. In one case, a couple was told they were going to have sex, so they might as well get married. Just want to listen to this little clip.
Back in the Jewish faith, the parents picked the spouses. Why? because the child trusted the parents
Yes.
to pick them, because who knows your child's heart better than you?
Yes.
You know, besides God, the parents, if they're intricately involved in raising their children.
I just think it's so ironic considering they won't even let parents be involved with their kids. What they're saying is like Mark and Leslie should be able to choose their spouse because they're cult leaders, because they want to be in control, they want to abuse. Additionally, there was physical abuse multiple times. Leslie would put her hands on people, grab people by their shirts, grab them by their arms, sit on them, grab them by their face, or even slap them. In some of the instances, she aggravated some of the boys. In one of them, it was a public knowledge that Mark put his hands on somebody and like punched him or something. But it was supposedly just like one incident and he was protecting his wife. No. Mark and Leslie physically put their hands on people. There have been 2 to 3 more instances of Mark choking somebody or grabbing them by the neck, as well as instances of Mark's body slamming people. Not to mention the fact that he would choke out girls from behind and tickle girls whenever they didn't want it. So physical abuse, it's there. They were left in unsafe places, like in this instance where they went to Cincinnati and were staying in this building that wasn't finished, with 1 bathroom. They were limited to 3-minute showers after working all day long, and then told not to go outside at night because it was dangerous. Mark and Leslie did not stay in this building with them. Mark and Leslie never stayed where the kids stayed. They always stayed in a nice house or a hotel or an Airbnb. And while the kids worked on these quote-unquote mission trips, Mark and Leslie dilly-dallied around the town. They went shopping, they saw the sights, they took their kids to the park and ate. Multiple instances of the kids getting bed bugs and being in extremely unsafe and unsanitary conditions. Whenever they did contract bed bugs, they were sprayed down before they came into the main house so they wouldn't get bed bugs in the main house where Leslie and them were. And it sometimes took them a really long time to treat the bed bugs. Another pattern I've seen is that many kids were just taken off medications cold turkey whenever they came in, because if you're not healed, then you're not believing, even though Leslie took medications. In several instances, this caused kids to have seizures, which is not uncommon, because if you're on an antidepressant and then you cut it cold turkey, you can have a lot of really serious side effects. But even whenever people had seizures, they didn't get people help. People had full access to knives, airsoft guns, BB guns. One kid, after getting shot with an airsoft gun or a BB gun, Mark and Leslie made him wait overnight. They did not call anybody except for their lawyer to make sure they wouldn't get sued. The doctor said it was like hamburger meat. They would also tell kids that they had legal guardianship and that the parents signed over their rights. You actually can't do this in Arkansas. You have to go to court to get legal guardianship. Another thing that I mentioned is that they had dangerous people around. They weren't properly vetted. They really had no reason to be working with kids. In some cases, people were subjected to horrible physical punishment, like doing 1,000 push-ups or sit-ups or squats. In some cases, people were threatened. If you get a scratch on that furniture, I'll kill you. This guy carried a gun, and he often reminded especially the boys that he carried a gun and that he knew how to use it. They were sent for 2 weeks to Missouri to live with this man in a very cramped quarters with no beds, sleeping on sleeping bags. They were told to make dinners, to clean the floors. They were threatened with violence if they didn't make the sweet tea just right. And this is the guy. This is a picture with Caroline, their daughter. There was a man who consistently was around and donated a lot of money to the Dollars. This man would often use the kids as exploited labor, having them do things like move furniture, work at auctions, and stuff like that, and sometimes promising to pay them and then not paying them. Although I've heard that they gave Mark money for payment, and of course Mark didn't give it to the kids. But this guy probably knew that he wouldn't. These kids were just worked all the time. I mean, you worked or went to school, you came home and then ministered, or worked some more, and then stayed up till sometimes 1, 2, 3 a.m., and then had to get up at 6 a.m. to get yelled at in Bible study. Not to mention that during their Bible studies, they preached things like healing hymens, had people stand behind others, and then had the person, not knowing who was behind them, say what they thought the Spirit said they needed to work on. Mark and Leslie would beg for money for food because they didn't know how they were going to make it, and people would bring loads of groceries, and then they would still say that they weren't going to make it and they needed money. Whenever their groceries were brought in, they were separated. The Dollars had their specialty foods that they wanted to eat and that were just for them. And then there were foods that were given for everybody else, usually the cheaper and frozen foods. Not to mention that everybody was given 3 square meals a day, no snacks in between. They had to provide their own snacks, which then were sometimes told they were gluttonous or greedy. What they ate was highly monitored. Kids were often hungry, And then people who were different body sizes were told they were fat, they shouldn't have seconds, or they were gluttonous. So despite that there were tons and tons of donations and food constantly being given, the kids were hungry. And then when they went out to eat, Mark and Leslie could get what they wanted, but the kids had to share food. There's a reason why most of the people you see are like pretty thin. And for body types that weren't like that, they were shamed constantly. While they were raking in all this money and donations and food, Mark and Leslie were going on expensive trips and vacations. They were going to Branson. They were shopping. Their kids had the best clothes. They had name brand things, Nike, North Face, Columbia, Eddie Bauer. They occasionally bought things for their kids, just to be able to say they did, but it was at minimum at best. They also told kids and teens that they needed to tithe to them. That's right. Tithe to Mark and Leslie. Mark and Leslie were open about their sex life. Leslie often had educational moments for the girls, telling them how they should behave, what they should do. Mark even sometimes playfully interrupted, like, "Oh, I was good at that." Not appropriate. While Leslie did this with the girls, Mark would often make comments to the girls about how things were pretty or that it was nice whenever they did things like that. Mark would also tell the boys that Leslie wouldn't go down on him and that he needed a good night in a hotel, if you know what I mean. This topic brings me to the most disturbing allegations yet, and a pattern that I've seen. And so here's the trigger warning for SA. Predators look for vulnerable people. They look for the most easily accessed. That's exactly why foster homes have rules. That's why people are really careful and we have mandated reporters. That's why people are educated on predators. Now, if Mark and Leslie worked for DHS or took in kids, they would have had mandated reporter training. Would they care about it? Absolutely not. They're narcissists. They're abusers. It's just another way for them to make money. That's why they always wanted to adopt people, because it was probably like an extra tax break. Mark and Leslie were predators themselves, so of course there were predators hanging around. Did they report? No. In some cases, whenever Mark was approached about people being inappropriate, we're told, "No, I'm sorry that happened," and there was nothing else done. Whenever I was there was an essay that happened, a male to another male. Mark and Leslie actually mentioned this to different people across different timelines, but they never reported it, and they kept it under wraps. Not only that, but they let that person come back over and over again. But this isn't even the worst of it. One man who I mentioned who gave a lot of money was particularly predatory. Many people warned Mark and Leslie, reportedly, that he was creepy, to say the least. He often told kids that he would pick up kids from parties when they didn't want to call their parents, that he would provide alcohol, like he was a cool person that they could come to. 100% pedo behavior, okay? He also reportedly had cameras in his house. And yet, Mark and Leslie let girls go over there and house sit. What's most disturbing about it is that he had 5 bedrooms and no guest beds. So he was like, "Oh, it only makes sense for you to stay in my bed in my bedroom. You can just use my bedroom and my bathroom." And yet, reportedly, he had cameras everywhere. That's really weird. Why would you have like such a big house and a mansion and all this money and yet not a guest bedroom, a proper guest bedroom? It's extremely disturbing. On one occasion, Mark decided it was safe to let this man take a singular male teenager with him on a trip. A male teenager who was under the care of Mark and Leslie. Not only did this man buy this teenager alcohol, but he attempted to assault him. I'm not going to get into the details because this is somebody else's story to share if they choose to. But let's just say it was awful. And what happened is considered an inappropriate assault, taking it to the next level. Mark later asked this child about it and did not report it when the child told him yes, that something had happened. Another thing is that reportedly, after Mark and Leslie were told and warned about this man by somebody close to him, he went on to buy them a cruise, which they accepted, reportedly after being warned. This is extremely disturbing, keeping this person around when you've been warned. They don't care about people. They don't care about kids. They care about money. They care about their expensive on-cloud shoes and having the perfect house and having nice cars and having expensive things and looking good to other people. They care about their nice trips and having a cushy life. The only thing that they want to use kids for is work and money because they don't have real jobs. Because yes, Leslie, all you've ever done is sit on your ass. And Mark, it's true for you too. Except you're so sadistic that you enjoy being the slave laborer over your slaves. I will continue this series. I will continue doing interviews. I am happy about the decisions I have made. I will continue to expose Mark and Leslie for who they truly are, which I have no doubt in my mind is abusers and narcissists, con artists who are very good at this. as well as the place that they're at now, is the Ramp and Karen Wheaton, who is another con artist who is very good at this. I've come to decide that, in my opinion, they're not only narcissists and con artists, but also this doctrine that they teach is inherently abusive and inherently controlling and damaging to people. I really hope that you guys are taking care of yourself, and I hope that you take some time to do something much more light after watching this video.
And they are probably never the same after they've had an encounter with Mark and Leslie Dollar.